Information discussed in this podcast may be sensitive in nature to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Richard Davison was living his best retired life in 1997. He was putting much of his energy into sailing, which was one of his favorite activities. Since he had back surgery not too long prior, he had to give up his other two passions, which were jogging and hiking. But sailing was still something he loved to do, and luckily, living in Southwest Los Angeles, he was just a short drive to the marina where he kept his boat. On October 29, 1997, 70-year-old Richard was planning on driving into Los Angeles that morning for a doctor's appointment. He told his wife he'd be home later that afternoon. But Richard never made it back home, and the quest to find him uncovered other missing elderly patients who disappeared either en route to the doctor's appointment or en route home from a doctor's appointment. All of these patients were seeing the same doctor. All of their disappearances happened within a few months' time frame. Was this doctor involved in something, or is this just a terribly tragic coincidence? 4 patients were reported as missing persons. 1 would be found alive years later in a nursing home. However, the circumstances regarding her situation were also suspicious and unnerving. Richard Davison's case would also prove to have many twists and turns. Was that of Richard's own doing or someone else's? The story of Richard Davison is baffling, truly mysterious, and has remained unsolved for decades now. Where is Richard Dean Davison? Richard Dean Davison married his wife Mary on Catalina Island off the coast of California. This was one of his favorite places, and he would spend the rest of his life visiting the island as often as he could. Richard also enjoyed hiking the area mountains and trails, and he was a regular runner. That is, until a back surgery would virtually put an end to those activities for him. But instead, Richard put all of his energy into his other passion, sailing. On the morning of October 29, 1997, Richard left his Westchester home for a doctor's appointment in Los Angeles. Richard was 70 years old, but in decent health and with all of his wits about him, according to everyone who knew him. Now that morning, he left the house around 8:30 a.m. He told his wife, Mary, that he'd be back early in the afternoon. Now, there's a few important details we don't know here. Actually, there's quite a few of details that we don't know. We don't know how far away his doctor was in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is a big city. How long of a drive would it have been for him to get to the doctor? Was it a routine doctor appointment? Was there any reason this appointment might take longer? For example, I wonder if they were going to be running any tests or anything that would take up more time. And I only say this because he had told Mary he'd be home that afternoon, so he was expecting to be gone at least 4 hours, maybe more. Or could he have been perhaps planning on running some errands while out in the city? We don't know those answers, and from here, we don't have an exact timeline either. What we do know is this. We know that Richard never came home. Mary also learned that Richard never made it to the doctor's appointment that morning. Eventually, Mary somehow discovered that Richard's car was parked in the lot at the marina where they kept their boat. Whether someone informed her of this or she had driven there herself, we really don't know. That boat, Venturus III, was also missing. Now, Mary believed he most likely had decided to take the boat out on the water instead, perhaps intending on even going to Catalina Island. But eventually, with no word from Richard and Mary worrying about him becoming lost or broken down in the water, he was reported as missing. There would be one witness who would come forward, but their account of what happened wasn't very clear. They reportedly saw the Venturus III leaving the marina around noon that day, and they believed they saw Richard boarding the boat. But Richard had left his house at 8:30 in the morning, and he had not gone to his doctor's appointment as planned. So where had he been for those few hours? But again, we're not even 100% sure that that was Richard that was seen on the boat. Regardless, Richard never made it to his doctor's appointment. So why had he skipped it? Had he skipped it intentionally? Why the change of plans without letting Mary know? Search and rescue went out looking for Richard and his boat. They scoured the nearby waters, and on October 30th, the day after he had left for that doctor's appointment, his boat was found grounded on Dockweiler State Beach. Now, it was found in an odd way. The autopilot was left on, but the ignition had been turned into the off position. The inflatable was also missing. These clues led search and rescue to believe that Richard had had engine trouble while out on the water and took the inflatable to reach land. But where was he now? And the questions were just beginning. While looking into Richard's case, authorities discovered something a little odd, and perhaps even alarming. While the name of the doctor is generally kept quiet, we do know that Richard was last seen leaving for his doctor's appointment. A couple of months prior, a woman in Los Angeles vanished on her way home from a doctor's appointment with the same doctor. Patricia Laxer reportedly returned home in North Hollywood, California, right after a doctor's appointment on August 11th, 1997. She was never seen again. Her car would later be found near the Universal City Overlook, but there was no trace of Patricia anywhere around. Patricia was 63 years old. Now, this happened just 2 months before Richard would disappear. But that's not all. A third missing person was also linked to the same doctor. The year prior, Robert Black was last seen leaving his Los Angeles, California home on March 12, 1996. Guess where he was headed? He was believed to have been going to a doctor's appointment at that time. Robert never returned home and has not been seen or heard from again. Robert was 64 years old. A fourth report of a person missing also popped up on law enforcement's radar. Goldie Swanger was reported missing just before Richard in 1997. And guess what? Goldie was also a patient of the same doctor. Goldie's story would play out a little bit differently, however. She had been estranged from her family, and her family members had been looking for her. They learned that she had been reported missing, but the who and the why were unclear. Her family has since said that the entire circumstance surrounding not just her disappearance at that time, but the person who reported her disappearance was extremely suspicious. With a little more digging, her family had found out she was living in a nursing home. Now, no one seemed to be able to give them any answers, however, and they suspected that something weird was going on behind the scenes, although they didn't know why or what. By the time the family made it to California to see Goldie and try to get to the bottom of whatever was happening, Goldie had passed away. So what happened to Richard, Patricia, Goldie, and Robert? Is it possible that Richard just had an accident in the water and was never found? Interestingly, his inflatable was never found either. But if he was last seen going out on the water and then his boat was kind of found shipwrecked in a way, it would lead everyone to believe that something happened to Richard out on the water. But is it just a coincidence that in the span of 18 months, a Los Angeles doctor has 4 of his elderly patients go missing, either on their way to or leaving from his office? But what would be any motive or reasoning for a physician to be involved in these disappearances? Now, there were a couple of other interesting notes in their missing person files. First of all 4 of the missing persons were Jewish. Was the doctor also Jewish? Is that even relevant to these cases or not? It's really hard to say if that has anything to do with their cases, but it was noted in each of their files. Also, in each of their file notes, it is listed that all of them could possibly be living somewhere in a nursing home, which is exactly where they found Goldie. But none of these patients were diagnosed with any form of dementia, Alzheimer's, or having any type of cognitive or mental decline. So why do authorities think they could be in a nursing home? Is it just because of their age? And in all honesty, while they were older patients, they were still at an age where they could be living very healthy and active lifestyles. Patricia Laxer was the youngest. She was 63. Robert Black was 64. Richard Davison was 70, and Goldie Swanger was 75 at the time that each were reported as missing. Now, 63 and 64 are hardly ages to be moved into a nursing home unless there are some extenuating circumstances or medical reasons to do that. But yet, these notes appear in each of their files. So what happened to Richard Dean Davison? While everything again points to an accident on the water, we have so many unanswered questions. Why hadn't he told his wife where he was going or that he had planned to go out on the water? Why hadn't he gone to his doctor's appointment as scheduled? It doesn't seem that he was intending to do something rash, such as maybe to take his own life, especially if he had taken the inflatable out to try and reach safety. And why did one physician in Los Angeles have 4 patients mysteriously go missing within a year and a half? So again, this is one of those cases where we have very few clues and very little information, perhaps in part due to the length of time that has gone by. But I am curious. What do you think happened to Richard? Do you think the doctor-patient angle with all 4 of these cases is just a coincidence, or is something else going on here? I'm definitely curious to know your thoughts on this one. Richard is described as a Caucasian male standing 5'10" tall and weighing around 150 pounds when he was last seen in October of 1997. He was 70 years old with thinning gray hair, and he wore eyeglasses. Anyone with any information on Richard Davison is asked to call the Los Angeles Police Department at 213-485-5381. In fact, it is the same agency investigating the cases of Robert Black and Patricia Laxer as well. Goldie Swanger's case is considered closed. If you have any information on any of these cases, no matter how small you think it may be, please contact the LAPD. Again, their number is 213-485-5381. Thank you so much for listening to Richard's story today. As brief as it may be, he is a missing person. And I'm sure there is extended family out there that has always wondered what happened to Richard. And thank you as well for listening to the stories of Robert, Patricia, and Goldie's as well. There isn't much information out there to discuss on their cases, but I truly felt their stories needed to be told, especially if there is a connection to any of these disappearances, which really there may or may not be. Thank you for being here, for supporting our show and our mission. We could not keep going without you. And of course, we will be back very soon with another unsolved missing persons story. And until then, stay safe and hug your loved ones.